Hello again, 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 Peter. How are you?
Good morning, David, for the fourth time. First, I'd like to apologize to everybody. We've been having some technical issues. This is the joy of going live, and we've been delayed quite a bit. So we're going to actually, unfortunately, cut it a little bit short today, but hopefully, with the content we have, will be fascinating and interesting, like it usually is. And as always, we get to see David's new Aloha shirt. Yes, I got it right this time. It's an Aloha shirt,
Yes,
not a Hawaiian shirt.
right. Nope, good to have you back, Peter. We had the talented Talia Tamarkio sitting in for you last week while you were off on a business mission, but glad you're back.
Happy
And
to be back.
what are we talking about? What are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to cover the topic of the true cost and payoff of AI in business. And I know, our past have always been topics usually of technical in nature, but this one really is focused on the business, which I think both you and I agree is uh, the impact on business is going to be, I would say, profound.
Yeah. Yeah, I think profound and whatever is even more grander than profound, right?
Yep.
And yet what's funny is I think, because we've all been trained this way in business, people are sort of looking at this through a very quantified cost benefit lens. I don't know that I agree that any numerical calculation of cost benefit actually captures all the nuance of you know what this can cost and how you benefit and whether you should be investing in AI. What are your take on that?
Oh, I 100% agree with you. I mean, of course, by definition, since we have an AI firm, I'm going to agree with you. But I think just more practically speaking, I of course agree with you. It's quantifying the benefits of AI, I think, is rather difficult because I think there's a lot of areas where it's very, if not impossible, really, to quantify the real costs. I'm sorry, of not doing it. I mean, I think the costs of not doing it are very high, and the costs of doing it are, other than the technical infrastructure costs, which you obviously I think you can
Right.
calculate, it's the other benefits, the intangibles, the soft benefits that are very hard to put a number on. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Oh, very, very hard to put a number on. And I think it's one of the reasons to me that it's really hard to put a number on it is when you integrate AI effectively into your organization, you're not doing it in a way that you can just simply point to a tool, a process, a product, and say, this is my AI generated revenue or savings or whatever, because you're
Right.
integrating it into the way that people work every day. And so, in some sense, I almost think of the benefits of AI are getting sprinkled in lots of different places around the company and
Right.
makes it very hard to sort of isolate exactly what the impact is. Um,
Right. No, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think the way AI has been largely integrated into a lot of firms is through employees using these tools on their own without the sanctions of the corporation. And they're seeing the immediate benefits, like using ChatGPT or whatever out there to make their day-to-day a lot easier. Um,
yeah.
but I want to say something, and you and I always talk about this. It's imperative, and I think a lot of CEOs, when AI first came, I'd say first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, went to their CIOs and said, "You take ownership of this." And I don't
Yeah.
think that was the correct answer. I do think this is something that the business needs to be deeply involved in because that's where the real benefits are going to come from at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I can't count the number of times I've heard people say, well, AI is just another technology. And I guess technically they're right. I mean, it is a piece of technology and it has many of the same challenges and opportunities around it as any technology. But I think that's underselling it dramatically. And it goes back to what you said, Peter, which is this is something that virtually everybody in an organization could be using in addition to powering applications and systems and other things, and it sort of is more pervasive than just another technology makes it sound.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what most, what some people miss is the real benefit of applying this to, we'll call it more traditional white collar jobs. And that's really where you're going to have a broad impact. I mean, if you're a financial firm and you're running your portfolio manager, for instance, and you're doing something like maybe you're doing equity research or you're doing just macro research or whatever you're doing, this is where generative AI and AI can really make, change how you operate on a regular basis substantially. And I think
Yeah.
those are the types of things that, a tech organization, unless they're deeply embedded into the business, are going to see. And that's a big loss, I think, from an organization standpoint, to not have that. capability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I don't know if this is makes sense to you, but often when I'm thinking about like the business cases and business benefits, I sort of break it into two large buckets. I think about the use of generative AI by individuals as a
Mm.
productivity enhancer and job aid to help them do their jobs. And then
Right.
the second bucket for me is applications and systems that are built around generative AI. That
Right.
may do some of the similar tasks to the individual use, but they're more institutionalized, more systematized, and sometimes can be a lot more complex. Does that
Oh,
two
that
buckets make
resonates.
sense?
Oh, I 100% makes sense. I
Okay.
think you're absolutely correct. And I think in all, you and I have had a lot of conversations with businesses. The former, using ChatGPT or one of the foundational models that, most of your employees are either using sanctioned or otherwise, that's happening. It's the
Yeah.
deeper embedding of the technology into an organization and using your own information, your own data to really get those massive benefits. That's not happening yet, or it's happening extremely slowly. Don't you think?
Yeah. Early adopters are doing it, but a lot of companies haven't gotten there yet. And frankly, I think a lot of companies aren't even really grasping that that's a thing they could and should do.
Right.
Where I guess the other question is where do we put AI as a coding assistant? Do you put that in its own bucket, or is that part of bucket number one around productivity tools?
I think you put that in its own bucket. And I'm glad you brought that question
Yeah,
up because you know me, I love that because I've been embracing these tools, and again, I try not to oversell the capabilities, and clearly there's some limitations. But I remember I had this discussion a couple of years ago with, when ChatGPT first came out, and CI, what do you call it, Chief Innovation Officer at one of the firm, somebody I was talking to worked at another firm, and they were like, let's throw a lot of money at the wall, let's do all these cool things, and they didn't make any progress. And my response was basically, and this was 2 years ago, these tools happen to be really good at coding. I don't understand why you would not embrace that sooner rather than later, because you're going to learn a lot and your organization's going to understand the capabilities and develop. Now, fast forward 2 years, I use these tools like Cursor.ai or Aider or some of the other ones out there. And I will say unequivocally, the speed increase is astronomical in
right.
developing code. They're not flawless. There's still a lot to learn. But if I can take a junior developer and I can make them act like a more senior developer, or I can, get a senior developer, make them 3 to 4x more productive, why would I not do that? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and moreover, you can have some consistency of code, which I think is incredibly beneficial.
Right.
Um,
Right.
eh, I'm baffled as to why that's not more embraced at more places.
Well, let's pick that one. Let's start with bucket number three, the coding thing. I mean, it's interesting because why isn't it more embraced? I think part of it may be resistance among some developers who, are potentially feeling threatened by it. There has been a lot of talk about how this could reduce the amount of development staff. But then I look at some of the large tech firms who have recently disclosed their estimates on what percentage of their code is written with the assistance of AI. And for some of the large firms, it's been more than 50%.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that doesn't mean that they have had a 50% reduction in software engineers, right? So
No,
if you were telling a software engineer whether they should like fear for their job or not, how would you explain the benefits to them?
I think it makes them faster. I think it makes them much more productive. I think it allows them to do more of the harder work and less of the stuff that's just a grind bore that every developer has to do. Like back in the day when I developed, I mean, how much time was spent doing helper functions, things that just didn't require any brain power, but they had to get done. And I think
Right,
these tools, like I'll give you, for instance, there was an API I was trying to interface with, and I needed Python library to do that. And it was not an API for which there was one. I pointed it to documentation and I said, please go generate an a Python library for me, wrapping this API with the following parameters, what I was attempting to do. And 30 seconds
right,
later, I had a fully functioning Python library that I was able to integrate with and use, and I had no problems, and it did exactly what I wanted to do. And it was, yeah, 1,000, 2,000 lines of code, whatever it was. I'm sorry, writing code to do that is like watching paint dry. Have it do that for me is just
right,
easy. Go, do, done. End of story. I saved all that time. I've saved a day of work. Why would I not do that?
right. Why would you not? And I think that's the key thing for me is it allows good developers, good software engineers to spend their brain power on the more challenging tasks that need their insight. Um, I
Right.
also always remember the fact that, and I think I mentioned this once before, but I remember the fact that I was working on a large cloud migration strategy once, and there were several thousand applications to be migrated. And as I started looking at the details of those applications, it turns out, probably not surprisingly, although it was news to me at the time, that the vast majority of the applications this enterprise had were very small, very infrequently
Right.
used, and arguably not mission critical. Like they were doing important functions. They were important enough to warrant an application,
Right.
but if they didn't work, you could do the process manually, right? And so um, it's interesting because I think that most organizations have a minority of applications that are mission critical. They need to be highly performant, highly resilient, operate with a high degree of trust and integrity. And then they have a lot of applications that are simply less important.
Right. But
How do you relate that to, AI generated code and AI as a coding assistant?
well, I think, look, it's always you're going to wind up spending more of your time on the harder applications and less of your time on the ones that are just that's easier to do and don't really require somebody to do them. It's kind of look, I'm going to get these tools. I'm going to have a class of applications or work that needs to get done that maybe isn't for which is not a developer that's readily available, but because I'm increasing capacity, I can now get those applications completed. And if they're simple
Right,
app and have my developers focus on the truly high value type projects that are not only mission critical, but are going to generate revenue for the firm. And I
right,
think that's you'll see that change. I think it's really important. And it's not like you're going to need some firms will probably need less developers or will do with less and look at it from that perspective. I don't. I think it's important to use these tools to take your developers and make them more productive. There's never a lack of work to do. There's always an enormous amount of
right,
work to do, and there's always much that doesn't get done. Hence a budgeting cycle every year. Now, if I can effectively triple my budget by not tripling my budget by giving, engineers tools to triple their capacity, I'm sorry, as a CEO, CFO, that's to me is a no-brainer. You just do that. Um,
right.
you know, and I do think, and you and I had a very interesting discussion yesterday specifically about, and I'm going to pivot to something completely different. Legal, another area where these tools or the beginnings of these tools are really going to start to take over, I think, a lot of legal work and they're going
Yeah.
to start moving up the food chain in a major way. I think that's a natural evolution of the capacity and capabilities of these tools. And again, as a CEO or CFO or COO, I'd be like, why would I not want to save on my legal bills? With a tool that can do a lot of this work for me. Early days,
Right.
mind you, but you and I know where this is going quickly.
Well, so let's pivot to that. And I think I'm not sure whether legal work goes entirely into bucket two or bucket one, but it's spread across those buckets. Here's the interesting thing about that, and this is probably true of all of these categories. Coding, AI as a productivity tool or AI as the basis for an application. In none of these situations are we seeing organizations completely remove humans from the loop, right? These are tools for
No,
humans to use. And the legal field is a great example. I don't think there's anybody out there who is seriously advocating replacing a legal counsel with an AI chatbot. Using
right.
AI as a productivity tool for legal counsel is a whole different story, right?
100%. And you and I coined the term, or maybe we didn't coin the term, but we started using it over a year ago, which is augmented intelligence
Yeah.
and giving people tools to augment their capabilities to make them operate at a higher level than they would otherwise be able to do. And I think this is
Yeah.
certainly one area where you can do that.
I think it is, and let's talk for a second about that augmented intelligence. We started by talking, a few minutes ago about all of the productivity use cases, for example, that companies are rolling out. Whether it's ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Gemini tools, they're giving people in the company the ability to apply technology for things like help me rewrite this document or summarize emails or capture action items out of a meeting transcript. There's no doubt that these save time. But
Oh, yes.
here's the other part, since we did say it's about the cost and the payoff. Those can be tremendously empowering and they can be tremendously time saving. They can also create a lot of fear and anxiety in people who aren't sure whether using these tools means the end of their job, or they aren't
Right.
sure how to effectively use them. And I think that's maybe the biggest challenge with rolling out AI as a personal productivity tool is it requires a lot more than just turning on the tool. This is not like switching from Lotus Notes to Microsoft 365 for your email platform,
Right.
which is a big transition. This is a bigger transition. This requires people to be taught, and not just once, but continuously supported in learning how to use these tools, what they're good at, what they're not good at, how to
Right.
effectively integrate it into their work, right?
Right.
So, and I think that gets missed, and that's maybe one of the hidden costs that
Mhm.
organizations forget.
No, I think you're right. I know you're right. I look at just you and me, and we've been on this journey for a while now, and there is still fairly regular occurrences where I go, well, why don't I use AI for this? Why don't I use one of the AI tools for this? Because I'm going to save myself an enormous amount of time. And it doesn't always readily occur to me. And I'm still trying to retrain my brain to think like that. Well, mind you, I've integrated into, most of what I do on a regular basis. But there are still times I go, oh, and I think about it after the fact, like, why didn't it's like you said, it's that constant cost of you have to retrain individuals to think differently. And you have to
Yeah,
get that and have to over and over and over again before it becomes second nature. And that takes time. And that's not accounted for when you start rolling out some of these platforms.
no, I totally agree. It's a necessary step and an expense that people don't always figure into the cost benefit of these platforms. Um,
Right.
so yeah, now what are the benefits? Like clearly we talked about productivity. Are there other ways that employees, that humans can benefit from using AI as productivity tools?
I think what it allows you to do, it allows you to focus on, I think, the higher value, higher quality. But I also think, look, we all go crazy by the admin, stupid work that we just have to do as a part of our daily basis.
Right,
I think it
right.
frees you up to do things that are more intellectually challenging and add value. I think I like that part of it. To me, again, it, it will do the admin work better than I'll do it because I'm not focusing on it, and it frees me up
Right.
to do things that I like to do. And I hate admin work. I am notorious for hating admin work. But it makes it
Yeah.
easier to do the work that I truly enjoy doing.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a key point. It's not just about productivity, because you can argue that higher employee productivity benefits the employer more than the employee. But if
Right,
you also look at it as it actually can make people happier because they feel like they're spending their time on tasks that matter more and are more enjoyable and are more, more appropriate uses of their talent and their brain power.
right.
That's a huge benefit. Like, to me, that's a great benefit.
Look, I mean, happy employees are good for an organization. Nobody wants a bunch of unhappy employees running around complaining about things. You want them to be productive, and generally, people that are like their jobs are far more productive than those that are not. And nobody wants to spend. And you and I can probably riff about this for a whole session on itself. Working in a big bank for many years, the amount of admin work that we did was astronomical.
Yeah. Yeah, it was painful. It was an incredibly painful part of it. And we've talked before, just casually, about return to office mandates and things, and without getting too deep into that, clearly there are people who believe that an organization that is forcing 5 days in the office is going to miss out on talent in the future because people
Right,
won't want to work in that environment. I think the other thing that I'm starting to see is organizations that are slow and reticent to adopt and permit and encourage the use of AI as productivity tools. Do you think there could be a similar pushback amongst employees saying, I would rather go work for a place that lets me use these tools than a place that doesn't?
oh, 100%. To me, it's one of those rapidly fundamental technologies that if an organization says, "Well, you can't use AI because I have security concerns or something else," they're only hurting themselves. and I would say short and
Yeah,
long term. I think yeah, one certainly talent retention, but your productivity. I mean, look, I saw a great article this morning. A software developer running a firm, 25 people, built around. Uh, I was CEO actually, built around using AI tools so they can develop another software product. And he's spot on when he said, had I done this 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it would have been a 200-man shop, and I'm doing it with 25 instead. And I think
right,
that is exactly the answer. I mean, that's the case. That's where this is all going. And if, as an org, if you're a CEO, you're a business leader, and you're not embracing this capabilities, um, this is the first day of beginning of your demise because somebody will, and they will eat your
right.
lunch. I think that's just a matter of time.
Right. So, we've heard some tying it back to the return to work mandate or return to office mandate. We've heard some high profile CEOs basically say that they think when people are working remotely that they're lazy and they're not being productive.
Right.
And I unfortunately hear sometimes a similar sentiment from leaders who haven't really maybe used AI effectively and don't understand it enough. They say, well, if I let my employees use AI, it's cheating. Right. It's going to reduce the quality of the work.
I
It's right. Okay. So you obviously have a reaction to that. How does that make you feel?
That's a very I think a very simplistic, naive response, and it shows a lack of education upon the capabilities, and that goes back to well, you and I teach class, a lack of education on the real capabilities of these tools.
Right.
And I don't understand. I remember years ago I was deploying BI tools, and I remember the business reaction initially was, "Well, I've been doing this for 30 years. What can you tell me about my customers that I don't already know?" And you fast forward 3 months when we did a lot of work and we were giving them information they didn't even know we can get, they were
Right.
dumbfounded and they were shocked. And
Right.
all of a sudden it became, well, I got to embrace this. This is my future. And then all of a sudden it became their idea. Okay. I you know how the game goes. You know what happens with,
Oh yeah.
but I think that's so naive, especially these days. It's so naive because you're really doing a massive disservice to your corporation on so many levels to not closely look at these tools and integrate them into your processes. How can you use them? I mean, it's a force multiplier, don't you think?
I do, and I think it also argues that, like a lot of things, it needs to be led from the top. I would almost say that
100%.
before you do a large scale rollout of AI as personal productivity tools in an organization, you should start with leadership. And
Hmm.
I think that will help people understand the value and it will set the tone for the organization that there is an appropriate and effective way to use these tools.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. It has to start from the top. Um,
Yeah,
And it even goes back to, I think a real thing that you and I often speak about, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but is, doing AI correct really also involves, and again, one of the more hidden costs is most firms have never looked at their data or managed their data effectively. And that
right.
is really, I think, imperative or foundational or really critical to helping a firm embrace it, not just on the fringes, but really deeply embedded in part of the DNA of an organization.
Yeah, no, it's
Mm.
it's true. I mean, I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations still treat data, especially unstructured data, like piles of paper, and it's not particularly organized. But ironically, it's
Right.
also not as easy to find. Like I know lots of people who can have information in piles on their desk and they can pull out the right piece of paper relatively quickly. But when it becomes abstracted and virtual, it's very hard to navigate. So I think you're right.
Yes.
This is going to uncover a lot of cases where companies have not done much to manage their data effectively. Um,
Right.
let's switch. So we've talked about sort of the first bucket around personal productivity tools, and we clearly agree there's huge benefits there, but companies also need to be a little bit more thoughtful maybe about how they roll this out to people and how they support them. We've talked about use of
Right.
AI as coding. That was I think our third bucket and as a coding tool. And look, I think we both feel like there's no doubt that it's coming and it's tremendously valuable and we should embrace it.
Mhm.
What about
Right.
that second bucket of AI powered applications and automated processes?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's like an evolution on a scale, a maturity scale, in order to get to that level, where you really start. I mean, a lot of what we spoke, the personal productivity, enhancing it, say software development, but When you're really talking about or speaking about enhancing your internal applications, that's a different level, I think, of maturity within an organization. It's I have a lot of data. How do I use that information? But it also has a lot of challenges, and it's going to be, I think, later in the game, so to speak. Do you agree?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, later in the game in terms of organizations working their way up to it, right? I think it's
right,
also, but it's also where the massive payoff is because as you
100%.
said earlier in the conversation, like at some point to create any real sustainable intellectual property and competitive differentiation, you have to introduce your data, your company's data, which is really
Right.
your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom has to be brought into this. And that's
Right.
what happens. This is where that happens when you start creating solutions around AI.
Yes. No, 100%. I think if you're an organization, you want to truly embrace the real value of the technology. We'll call it technology, for lack of a better way of defining it.
Yep.
With your information, your data, and enriching it maybe with other external pieces of information to build a richer, more complex, subtle picture. That's where the value lies. That's where the real value lies. That's where you really
Yeah.
see big results. I don't know. Let's talk about medicine for a minute. I mean, I think this is where you see big gains in productivity or even diagnosis when you join this highly unstructured information with more structured information. You can do diagnoses at a level that an individual can't do because you're bringing
Right.
massive pieces of information together and identifying really subtle um, trends or patterns that a human can't easily identify.
Yeah. Yeah. I think let's take another example because I think this is one that is easily accessible for a lot of organizations, and I see it as maybe a launching point for a lot of companies that are doing this when they after they've done personal productivity and they've deployed AI for coders, they're looking for really building a system. And a good place to start in many cases is creating AI as a customer support representative assistant, not
Right.
directly facing off against your customers, right? So we're not talking about your
Yep.
customers interacting by text or voice with a chatbot, but as a tool sort of supporting your customer service reps.
Yes.
And if you look at it, there's a bunch of things it can do. First of all, when a customer calls in, you could have AI very quickly and dynamically generate a summary of all the customer's history and transactions and issues in a way that's easy for the customer associate to digest.
Right.
That would be useful. You could create the tool that is trained on your internal policies, procedures, documents, etc., so that when a
Yep.
customer asks a question, that CSR can, quickly find the answer and convey information back to the customer. So it's like an advisor for them. And
Right.
by the way, I have had an opportunity to sit in a couple of call centers over the last few years, and one of the things that always strikes me is there's the tools provided by the company for the call center staff, and then they all, in various forms, they all have their own organically created cheat sheets
Of
and tool
course.
sheets. Sometimes they share a spreadsheet
Yep.
full of tips and tricks and instructions, or a document or a database somewhere.
Right.
But this points to the fact that like there's so much more you could be doing to give these folks the tools to do their job quickly and effectively.
And there's nothing like, I'm sorry, a customer service rep that is doing their job really well creates a lot of really happy customers at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and this is the one where like that's a great example because well, let's add a third layer to the customer service rep and then talk about like how hard it is to measure benefits. So let's say so we first have like AI generates a synopsis of the customer and what they've called about and their problems to the rep. Great. Rep understands very quickly. Two, AI generates helps the customer service rep do research and generate recommended responses back to the customer. Great. Number three, which I think is also very interesting and companies are really doing this today, is using AI to dynamically, real time interpret the customer's response and mood and give you a
Yes.
warning when, hey, this is like this customer is getting frustrated. And that could trigger an escalation to a more senior person. That could trigger
Yep.
some sort of offer to help them remain a customer and keep them happy, etc. So now you look at that whole spectrum of things. You're like, all right, what are the benefits? Well, as you said, you have a happier customer. So you might
Mhm.
see some benefits in customer satisfaction scores. You might see that in terms of less customer churn and more steady, predictable revenue from your customer base. You might see it in terms of less turnover in the call center organization because you've got
Right.
CSRs who feel more supported and have better tools. You're going to get call volumes going up and time to close calls going down. You're going to get,
Hmm.
more rapid intervention when you have customers with issues that are just progressing and not getting solved, and you can step in.
Right.
Like, there's no single metric that is going
That's
to
going to capture all that.
capture how you're benefiting from that.
Now, it's all that soft kind of, I hate to say feeling stuff, but yeah, no, it goes a long way. And you're right. There's no easy way to measure. There's no real metrics, at least that I've come across, that are going to measure that. I mean, yeah, you can measure the drops in call times and stuff like that, and how many calls the individual takes. But it's the intangibles to me that are far more dramatic and help far more of the company. Like if I call a call center and I get a response really quick by somebody who is knows what they're doing, knows my history, and can identify and fix my solution. I'm sorry, fix my problem very quickly. I'm very happy.
Right. And yet,
And
somehow we tend to see, I see a lot of organizations that are measuring these tools based on usage. Maybe because they don't really have a good plan for what else to measure, and usage is easy to capture. But they're measuring the number of times in a week or a month that employees use tools for searching through information, or they're measuring the number of
right.
times that a customer service rep uses an AI tool to help answer a question. And I feel like that really misses the mark in terms of capturing the actual value.
Well, the metrics haven't caught up with the capabilities, not even close. And I'm not sure they ever will, nor probably should they.
Well, I mean, so that's a good point. Like, you look at, let's look at automation technology in general, right? Companies, depending on the market you're in and the size of your company, you're spending, maybe as low as 9 or 10% of your budget on technology, and sometimes more than 50% of your budget on technology.
Right.
And I think you could probably look at it and say, oh, this is a lot of money on technology, and I could probably have avoided spending all this money. Um, Yet, I don't think anyone believes that going back to doing everything manually is actually the way to do it. So I sort of apply that to AI, and I think, you mentioned this at the beginning of the conversation. What are the costs of not doing it? Maybe that's as compelling a reason as trying to just figure out the quantifiable benefits of using AI. Maybe part of that equation needs to be, and what happens to me if I don't?
But that's a good point. So you bring up called a philosophical point for a second. What happens to me if I don't use AI? When you don't understand the capabilities, it's hard for you to wrap your mind around what if I don't do it? It's a little, you have to have the benefit of hindsight. And I don't think we've been in the cycle long enough to really have that full benefit
Right.
yet. So I think like if I ask you today, David, if you didn't have your cell phone, your iPhone with you, you know, how different would your life be? It's easy. You've seen it. You know how you operated for the last two
Right.
decades.
Right.
So you understand what it would be like, your life would be like without a device like that. Now, I don't think most CEOs, C-level folks, board level, understand what this is going to do to their world. They have
Right.
no way of wrapping their head around it. They have no way of understanding. Maybe they do. I'm sorry, I'm being negative, but maybe they haven't been educated on where things are going to go the next couple of years and the true impact to their organization. They have
Yeah.
no way to identify and say, "Oh my God, this is going to upend every single process I have in my firm, and it's going to change everything from top to bottom."
Yeah.
They could, oh, it's another technology. It'll take 10, 15 years for us to embrace it and incorporate it and, move on. It's like anything else. And I don't, and you and I have been around the block for so many decades. We know that's not the case. This is very
Right.
different.
Right. And in a few years, I think companies are going to be chock full of people who have used this for enough years that the idea of not having AI as a
Agree.
job assistant is very foreign to them. Um,
Agree.
and, look, I wouldn't want to be in the position of trying to convince someone to come work for my company and saying, oh, by the way, you can't use AI. That'd be like, oh, saying, and by the way, we don't have an internet connection and you can't use email. You have to write your letters out and type them up.
Right. You got to do memos old fashioned way and send them into office email and, all that goes away. Yeah, no, I 100%
Yeah.
agree with you. I think,
Yeah.
or in some cases, and I think this is even going to be another part, you're going to have a lot of companies that are going to be built on this technology from scratch and they're going to compete with the big guys because it really is a force multiplier. And I
Yeah.
think, and they have the big guys playing catch up. And as well as I do, it's harder to get an elephant to move than it is to get somebody who's newbie starting out, young. And it's you don't move a battleship that easy. It takes a
No.
long time.
And the fact that it takes a long time means, therefore, you need to start your maneuver earlier, right? And I think for a lot of large organizations, medium organizations too, I don't mean just
Yeah.
enterprises, but for a lot of organizations out there, I worry that if they continue to debate and sit on the sidelines and try to time the market for starting to do things with AI, that they'll miss the window
Oh,
because
100%.
their competitors, both current competitors and companies that they haven't heard of yet, but someone is in a garage somewhere starting them, right, are going to outmaneuver them if they don't get some fundamental learnings from how to use AI. And I think you do need to go into it with that idea of, yeah, I want to see a path to some return on this investment. But I'm not doing it only because I need that return right now. I'm doing it because this is a this is a foundational capability that I want to learn to leverage in my company. And I'm
Right.
going to have to do some experimentation. I'm going to have to do some learning to get there. And I want to get going on that journey because if I wait, it could be too late.
And then there's a lack of urgency. There's no sense of urgency. And I think a lot of big corps like, oh, I don't need this.
Yeah,
And there's also, and you and I experience this in our long corporate careers is there's aversion to risk. And why change something that I think is working? And I can't find that, maybe you can't find a clear, obvious reason. And then that's another factor in a lot of this as well. It's that aversion to change and that aversion to risk. But again, you and I live it, breathe it, say it. So I think it's important. If I was a C-level folk, I'd be going, to my, why are you not doing this today? Why are we not doing this? We need to
right.
move. We need to at least have a sense of urgency and embrace it and play with it and educate our employees on the capabilities because it's coming fast. And this is not a 10 or 15 year cycle like the web and phones were. This is a very short cycle. It's happening
Yeah.
incredibly fast.
And the interesting impact it's had is it also has made it right for us to reevaluate what are our barriers to competition. So, a company that's developing software products might say that they're code based. They're 10 million lines of code that were developed over the
Right.
last 15 years with a team of 200 people. That's a significant barrier to competition. Well, it
Yes.
was last year. But this year, if 20 people can generate the equivalent code in six
Right.
months using AI generated coding, then your 10 million lines of code cease to be an effective barrier to competition.
Well, I think that's an awesome example. I hadn't even thought of that one, but you're absolutely correct. And how many companies out there have these complex business processes that have developed over decades with, millions and millions and millions of lines of code, and you're spot on. In the past, that was a massive barrier to entry. It's not anymore. In fact, it's an impediment
Right.
for you because it's legacy and you can't move as fast anymore.
Right. And I think the same thing is true of a lot of other barriers. Like if the barrier is just my collective wisdom in a market, well, again, you need to ask yourself, in what ways could an upstart or a new entrant into your market leverage AI to chip away at that barrier? And I
Right.
think that is absolutely what we're going to see happen. So I think, there was that famous memo that came out. I think it was an internal Google memo, the "We have no moat" memo, where a bunch of engineers proposed that the barriers that they had against encroachment from OpenAI and others were going to be different. They were crumbling and needed to be rethought with
Right.
generative AI. I think there are a lot of companies that their moat isn't as deep as they think it is right now.
I think a lot of companies just non-existent. And I think well, you articulated very well. And I remember when I started a software company back 25 years ago, the barriers to entry were high. I had to, build that infrastructure. I had raised a lot of money. There was a lot I had to do to get started and get it off the
Yeah,
ground. If I look today at all those barriers, I can do what I did in a fraction of the time, sitting in my office by myself, and I can generate a
yeah,
product. The barriers to competition have gone way, way, way down. And I think any CEO is naive if they think some upstart can't take over a lot of what they do far more inexpensively without the legacy that they've got in place and all the legacy code and all the stuff that they carry along with them, because that's
Right,
not real. You can, and it will happen, and it is
right.
happening.
Absolutely. So if we sum it up, I think, part of what we said is like if you're trying to understand business benefits, you need to think very holistically about it and maybe a strict quantifiable dollars and cents ROI case is not going to capture the nuance of why you should do this. You need to
Right.
think across a bunch of categories of deployment, including our bucket one, which was personal
Yep.
productivity tools. Bucket two was building applications on AI, and bucket three um, was coding, AI generated coding. We also could probably spend time talking about more use cases, and we'll do this in the future about things like
Yep.
process automation through agents and other
Mhm.
AI expressions. But I think the message is think broadly about this. Don't uh, be too focused right now on just the quantifiable ROI. Think about the cost of non-compliance. Think about the cost of not doing it. And really, this is something you should view partially through an ROI lens, but partially through a strategic investment lens.
Right. 100%. I agree. And I think there's a lot of things you and I wanted to cover today, unfortunately, because we got a little bit cut short. We didn't. And maybe in the future we'll have a second version of this because I think there's other topics as part of this that warrant a deeper discussion.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely always have more to say. So let's leave it there, and
Yep.
we'll pick up on a continuation of this discussion in one of
Yep.
the upcoming podcasts.
But that, David, I think, this was another awesome discussion. I apologize to everybody for cutting it a little bit short for all the technical difficulties, but I think I hope everybody got something out of this. I know you and I always do.
It's always fun. Peter, thank you again,
Always.
and talk to you soon.
And have a great day, David. You take care now. Bye, everybody.
All right, bye.